Welcome, everybody. This is Learn Biz, the podcast, all things small business. Ethan and Ryan, we're going to be talking to you with a follow-up. So if you've been following the podcast, and we hope you have, thanks to those who do tune in with us regularly. But the last episode that we did was on thought employees. And this is really a fascinating idea or concept, is to suggest that a lot of people get paid for their thoughts, their leadership, their decision-making abilities, not necessarily for what they produce. And as we were talking about that last time, we kind of left, there was a cliffhanger, kept it exciting, of how do you manage the different types of employees. And one of the things that I want to point out is that you never want to eliminate, you don't want to shift from one style of employee to another style of employee in your business. You want to recognize that you need to have a balance of different types of employees.
Correct.
And so this is going to be an episode on managing the different types of employees, but we're going to follow up from that. So we're going to talk about managing thought employees. We're going to talk about managing producers, and we're going to talk about managing contract employees. So those three, they came up in last episode with some discussion. Now we're going to talk about some action steps that you can take to manage those employees.
And just for the sake of a listener, if they didn't listen to the first one,
shame on them.
Shame.
Go back to being courteous.
That's usually my role to do that, not yours. But just, quickly that a thought, you kind of just gave a definition for what a thought employee is. Producers, generally that 8 to 5, there's something that they're producing. It's a little bit more quantifiable.
And I do want to clarify, producers and sales, I put in the same category for sake of this discussion.
Okay.
So and I don't know, you know what? Let's split those out. We're gonna talk about 4 categories. We're gonna do thought employees, producers, sales, and contract.
Okay.
Anyway, keep going.
So, anyways, just defining a little bit of difference with those are. Of course, a contract employee is pretty self-explanatory on that. So, but I did want to just put that clarity out there real quick. So if they didn't catch the first episode, highly encourage you to go listen to that and then come back to this one. But if you did miss it and you don't really want to, you're driving, you don't want to bounce around, then stick with us. It will make sense as we get through it.
Perfect. So I'm going to open it up with this big... Like, if you get nothing else from this episode, this is the big takeaway. And that is, as an owner, entrepreneur, manager, if you're in a position where you oversee a company or oversee individuals in that company, you have to recognize that different positions require different management styles. And if you try and manage everyone the same, you're
Correct.
Just going to have mistakes. It's sort of like, we do a lot of sports analogies.
Right.
If you have a bodybuilder and a marathon runner,
Correct.
They are both athletes and they both work very hard. But if you train your marathon runner like a bodybuilder, they won't be able to finish the 26.2 miles.
That's right.
If you train your bodybuilder like a marathon runner, they'll never be able to put on any weight.
That's right.
And so that's what we're talking about here. Is we're talking about understanding it's the sprinter versus the distance runner in track and field. It's offense versus defense in football.
Right.
Whatever sport you want to run with,
Right.
but there's a different coaching technique to the point that most sports actually have an offensive coach and a defensive. It's not even the same coach,
right.
is how much they will separate out this type of management.
And it's fascinating that in sports we get so much when it comes to position and mentoring and development correct. But when it comes to your business, we don't apply that. Well, because I'll show favoritism or, all employees should have that. But in sports, we clearly understand there's a difference in skill sets and what's required and the effort that's going to be done, even after game routines. But in work, we fail to do that way too often and establish that as a culture, right? Right?
Yeah.
Because my lineman, I need to be really, really, really big, right?
Yeah.
Right? I'm not trying to put them on a diet per se to get them lean and so they're a wide receiver, right? It's just so different. But in business, oftentimes we do that one. No, my sales guy, I got to hold them the same accountability as I do my line, manufacturing producer. That they both need to be here the same hours. Well, no, your sales guy needs to be out doing other things. That's just how it is.
Yeah. And I think that just to kind of continue this a little bit further, I loved how you said that, this idea of favoritism. So in sports, and I'm going to talk about soccer here for a second because I think that soccer is a great example. A lot of really good soccer players are able to play different positions, but they specialize in certain positions. That's because correct. It's not just the ability to kick the ball, pass the ball, run fast. It's also kind of a temperament. Do you look at the field defensively? Do you look at the field offensively? And so you can take someone who has the skill set, but if you put them in the wrong position, you might not have the chemistry that you need between certain players. And so that's kind of the coaching that we're talking about here. So I see this a lot with, this favoritism concept where businesses are saying, well, I don't want to, our salespeople are always out there causing problems. They're making deals, and then the accounting department has to clean up all the mess. And I'm like, that's actually correct. You should have your forwards on the soccer. They should be taking shots on goal. Yeah. And when those shots are blocked, the ball ends up getting kicked back to defense. And defense could be sitting there complaining like, oh my gosh, that ball's always getting kicked back to me and I have to pass it back up to the forwards. Yeah. Or they can look at it and realize, hey, forwards are supposed to be scoring. We're supposed to be moving the ball up the field. And that's the thing. If you have an accounting team that they're so frustrated with the sales team, they shouldn't be. They should realize, okay, my job is to support this salesperson so that they can go and make those deals, so that they can go drive those sales, because otherwise they'll never get the ball passed to them, is what happens in business.
Yeah. So on the thought producer, I guess we've talked about sales. I don't know if we want to add any more to sales versus, contract employee.
Yeah, let me, I do have some things that I want to put out there. So when I say producer, and you alluded to this earlier, and we talked about it more in the previous episode, producers are the type of employees that have a very clear line of input in, output out. Yes. And so I'm not, for sake of this discussion, I'm not talking about producers as only people who manufacture something or who create something or who produce something. I'm talking about people who have a very clearly defined role. So you can have a producer as someone who's on an assembly line. They receive a widget, they modify that widget, they kick it down the assembly line. You could also have a producer as someone who does customer service. Customer complaint comes in, I receive the phone call. There's really only, I walk them down and I say, okay, is your concern about a refund? Is your concern about a warranty issue? Is your concern, there's really only about 5 things. And you're looking at that customer service position and saying, as problems come in, how efficiently can you just resolve those problems? It's very efficient based. It's very consistent, repetitive type movements. And so that would be the definition of a producer. We mentioned last time in the episode that a waiter at a restaurant I would consider in that producer category.
Correct.
Because they're just turning the tables.
Yep.
and they should take the orders about the same every single time. They should get the food out about the same every single time. We want efficiency, predictability, consistency. So when I'm looking at managing a producer, I'm managing ROI, return on investment. And producers of the four is the easiest one to manage in terms of this ROI concept, because I can look at it and say, if you're a producer and you are, manufacturing widgets, the conveyor belt is going along, you need to get those widgets, you've got to put your additive manufacturing to that before the conveyor belt kicks it on to the next person on the assembly line. Or you've got to turn the tables within a certain amount of time at the restaurant, or you've got to process the loan at the bank within a certain time frame. And so all of those, I'm just looking at it and saying, okay, are you efficient at doing your job? Do you avoid downtime? Do you avoid problems? And can I calculate the wage that I'm paying you, the full salary, benefits included, equipment included? Do I get a higher return on investment? If the answer is yes, they're a good employee. If the answer is no, then you either need to train them or they're a bad employee.
Well, and sometimes, and I'm going to kind of bounce just a little bit, because I think sometimes when we look at that when we're looking at, are they producing more than what we're putting in, right? Mm-hmm. But if they're not producing more than we're putting in, are they a bad employee, or should it really be something that we should have as a contract employee? Because we don't need their service or what they're doing 100% of the time, right? And so I think as you talk about that analogy, it's also important to recognize that as we analyze that, because the point is understanding how to manage them, but also understanding how to manage them is are the time allotments full-time, or is it really part-time or partial time? I look at a small company that has a website that's more of an informational website. I'm not doing an e-commerce because I'm a service business per se. I can go out and I can hire a full-time IT guy, right? And he can make little tweaks here and there, but for the most of the time, he's going to be sitting there twiddling his thumbs unless I tell him to make a change, because I really don't need him full-time. I should be contracting out that service, right?
And I think that that's a really good distinction here when you start talking about. Okay, let me back up with a quick thought, and that is when we talk about contract, you can contract out any of these.
That's right.
You can contract out your sales, you can contract out your production, you can contract out your thoughts. So those are the three in-house. But the idea that you're hitting on here is to say, if my return on investment isn't there, how do I lower my investment? And if I have to hire someone at 40 hours or pay them a full-time salary to justify their skill set, then my investment is high, but my demand might not be there.
Correct.
And so if I'm ever considering whether I want to contract or whether I want to keep it in-house, then I'm looking at it and saying, well, what's my return on investment? And I can lower my investment through contract. The other thing that I want to hit on, a lot of times entrepreneurs, they get hung up, they'll see a contract and they're like, oh my gosh, they are contracting for $75 an hour their services. I could hire someone for $20 an hour. I'm like, yeah, but you have to pay that $20 an hour, 40 hours a week, whether there's work or not. And the contract, you only have to pay them for 3 hours a week because they get it done quickly.
This goes back to the first part of our conversations when we talk about positions and skill sets inside those positions, because that's the mistake that a lot of small business owners make, is that, well, I can hire that out. So I'll go and I'll find someone that has some IT background and I'll hire them for $20, but I also need you to help me over here on this labor line the next day, and I also need to help you over here on this, right? And then all of a sudden you can't figure out why your employees are bouncing and they're disgruntled. Well, because they just want to do IT.
Yeah.
But now you have them manufacturing something, or you have them trying to do some sales for you, or they're running deliveries for you, right? A number of years ago, in another industry, it was interesting that they were hiring someone that had to have a certain skill set, right? Mm-hmm. But their attitude was, when I hire this person that actually has a high skill set in this specific trade, they need to understand everything about my business, right? So I'm going to make them do all this grunt work for 3 or 4 months because they need to understand it. And they couldn't figure out why all these people kept bouncing, right?
Yeah.
Because no, you hired them to come over here with this specific skill set, and now they're not doing it at all.
Yeah.
Period. They're not doing it at all. And yet that's what they want to do. And it was I just sit there and I shook my head and I'm like, this is so obvious, right? Well, but they couldn't see it in their own paradigm.
I think this goes back to the sports analogy that we kind of kicked it off with. So we recently just finished the Olympics there in Paris, and I love looking at the medal counts of individual athletes. Some events like swimming, it's not uncommon to have a top swimmer get multiple medals because you can take that swimmer and you can put them in different events and it just fits. It naturally fits. Yeah. But there are other events. I don't think I've ever seen a shot putter do anything other than shot put.
Yeah, that's right.
Like that's
maybe discus.
Maybe.
But it's uncommon.
But that's just
certainly not medal in both.
Yeah, that's just their event. And so when you're looking at business, sometimes there are some things that can naturally cross over where you can take someone and say, look, I need you to do this and this. And the funny thing is a lot of times people look for the similarities, but they look at them just at the surface level where they think, okay, if you can do accounts receivable, then you can also do accounts payable. But a lot of times look at it and say, all right, if you know how to manage a marketing team, you probably also know how to manage an R&D team. And you could even though marketing and R&D don't have a lot in common, management of people and teams do. Yeah. And so you can find similarities, but if you're trying to get someone who is going to manage a marketing team and then have them do accounts receivables over here, that's asking your shot putter to go swim the 800 meter. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's not going to turn out good.
It's not going to turn out well. So
that's the one thing we have to make sure we don't make that mistake, is that just trying to cookie cutter everyone in our employees versus understanding, look, if I'm looking to try to cookie cutter everyone, I should probably be contracting out stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's more effective. It's actually cheaper in the long run because I'll use them for a couple weeks and then I'm done with them, right? And I'm not having them on my payroll for 12 months.
Yeah. Well, we've done, oh my goodness, this was a long time ago. We should probably do an updated episode on this. But you can contract out anything that is not a core competency.
Yes.
And I'm just going to leave that there because, like I said, that's a whole episode.
You're right. We should probably do a refresher of that.
On its own. But yeah, you should always be looking how to contract out any fringe ancillary tasks that you have. And a lot of times businesses, they think that these are critical to their business. Right. And I'm like, look, if it's not core and you don't have a competitive advantage in it, see if a contract makes sense. It doesn't always, but oftentimes it does. And that reduces the input on the ROI, which then makes it easier to attain that ROI. Right. All right. That was, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I'm sorry if that was a little bit much in a short bit, but so that managing producers, the other piece that I want to talk about is, as a manager, producers are very time triggered.
Yes.
They need to have a set time that they show up, a set time that they leave. Correct. They oftentimes need to have scheduled breaks. They need to, because you got to stagger it. You got to make sure that there's front desk coverage And so you can't just have them willy-nilly taking a break whenever they feel like taking a break. And a lot of entrepreneurs feel like this is picking on someone. Oh, everyone gets to come and go as they want, but this person has to be there. I'm like, yeah, that is correct. The quarterback has to throw the ball. If that's favoritism or picking on them, you can't have anyone else be throwing the ball, and that's just how the team works. And so yeah, if you're managing producers, you want to be very strict and stable with the hours, the time off, the breaks, which gets into, and again, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. Man, this is going to end up being a 3-part series. But it gets into a lot of modern workforces that have flexible work schedules, work from home work schedules. They have open-ended PTO policies. That does not work well for producers. And so if you have a mix of producers and thought employees or sales employees or contract employees, you have to treat your producers differently.
Yeah. And I think a lot of business owners fail to openly acknowledge that, no, our employees have different roles and different functions, different reasons why they need to be here when they are, and why some of them I should never see, right? Mm-hmm. But I think they fail to establish that too much or too little. And so now employees are, well, why did they get that benefit?
Yeah.
Well, no, time out. You need to understand that if you want that benefit, then you've got to change something you're doing so you move into that position. Otherwise, your position, this is what your position is required, right?
Well, so this was interesting. I was working with a business who was having this problem that there were certain employees that are just like, hey, why do they get all the perks? Why do they get all the perks? Why do they get all the perks? They were pointing a lot of fingers. And so the business was asking me, what do I do about this? How do I manage this? And I told them, I said, well, what opportunity is there for these employees to transition into the quote unquote better jobs? Yeah. And they said, well, we encouraged, and we did a deeper dive, and there really wasn't any opportunity. And so I worked with the company, and we actually put together a process to help employees move in the business. And the interesting thing that happened is going through this process, there were some employees that naturally shifted into a better role, and they were so much happier. There were other employees that stayed in the lesser roles and didn't even take the opportunity to try and move up. And in looking at it, it's some people don't want. They like more structure. Right. They like don't ask me to think. Tell me what to do is literally what they want, and that's okay. As an entrepreneur, if you have that type of position, hire that type of person, and they'll work for you for 20 years. Yeah. Showing up, doing the same thing every single day. Some people that sounds like hell. Other people that sounds like paradise. Yeah. And so understanding the ambition levels or there's so many people that they're like, I don't want to think at work. I want to clock in, do my job, come home. And when I come home, I don't want any stress carried over from work. Yeah. It's my time now, because you get into these thought positions and you can't turn it off. There's all this flexibility, but with that flexibility comes, okay, you're still dealing with a problem at 10 o'clock at night. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're not in the office anymore, but you're still dealing with that problem. Yeah. And they're woken up at 4 a.m. Okay, how am I going to deal with this?
Right.
And it's hard to get your mind to shut off, and it's hard to stop thinking about what did I forget or what did I miss. For thought employees, when it's good, it's great. When it's bad, it's horrible. And so I'll use that as the lead in for the thought employees. If I have a thought employee, I need to recognize that I'm paying them for their ability to make decisions, not for the amount of time they take to get to that decision, but the quality of that decision. Yeah. And so stop putting them to a standard of when they show up, of how long they're on break, of what they did while they were at a trade show, because none of that really, they can look busy. There are a lot of people who are trained to look busy in a company. And a bad manager will be fooled by that. They'll be like, "Oh my gosh, did you see all the reports that they created?" I'm like, "Yeah, with bad information." Yeah. Now we're making really bad investments in the company because of bad information. Yeah, there's novels of reports here, but none of it's good. And so, with thought employees, you need to have standards in place to measure the quality of their decisions. Look at how timely the execution is on that. I think Stephen Covey's 4 Disciplines of Execution.
Yes.
It's an excellent book/training.
Yes.
If you're wondering what we're talking about with timing of execution, do you have the ability to make a decision in a timely manner? Because it's been proven that a lower quality decision made in a timely manner will have a better positive impact on your business than a better decision made too late.
Well, and I find a lot of people who fall into that thought category, they tend to recognize and see all the resources around them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why their decisions generally are better, because they rely on everything around them to be the most productive and effective in what they do. Where someone who is a producer, they tend to look in their silo.
Yeah.
Right? Thought producers are looking at all the silos because every business has silos. You can say whatever you want, but...
And you're not going to get away from them. You can improve them.
That's right. But they're going to exist just naturally because of job functions on a lot of them.
Yeah.
But a lot of thought producer or a lot of thought employees, they understand those silos and how they interact with each other and how to leverage the resources of each one of those silos to get a more effective result,
Mm-hmm.
That synergistic result where we put 2 things together to get a greater outcome than what we normally would. They're good at that.
Well, the interesting thing to kind of piggyback on what you're saying is a producer employee, they are trying to hit 100% success.
Right.
If I've got a manufacturing line or a delivery schedule, let's go delivery schedule, all right? If I've got a delivery schedule, because that's a producer type employee,
right.
I need to get packages delivered on time. And so if I've got a delivery schedule and I missed one of my runs,
right.
then the domino effect, oh my gosh, the whole day is shot. And so they want to have a high level of 100% on time so that it flows smoothly. Thought employees, if you're expecting them to hit 100% of good decisions, then they're never taking risk or they're never answering difficult problems.
They're never being creative.
Yeah. Your company's not growing.
They're never running pilots to test stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thought employee has to be doing those things ahead of the rest of everybody else.
And so let's talk about corrective action here. So if I have a producer employee, then if they start screwing up, if they're only hitting 90 or 95%, maybe I write them up because that's their type of job. If I have a thought employee and they're hitting 90%, I'm giving them a bonus. And so one person's getting written up for that level of performance. The other person is getting a bonus for that level of performance. Going back to that whole favoritism thing it's totally different because you're looking for a thought employee that honestly, if they're hitting 80% of the time, that's, in my book, that's a really high success rate. Now, that does not excuse them to make mistakes. That means that they should present to you, hey, we're going to try this. There's risk involved. And so they should be calculating and understanding the risk factors. And so if you're hitting 80%, you should know that you're hitting 80%. Yeah. You should have the cash flow reserves to absorb that 20% loss. Right. It's the venture capitalist model where I'm going to invest in 10 companies. 5 of them I know are going to just flounder. They're going to do horrible. 3 of them I hope break even and I get my money back. Yeah. And 2 of them are going to be such all-stars that they'll offset the rest of the investment. Yeah. And so that's only a 20% success rate of a venture capital model. And I mean, I get that's a rule of thumb kind of model, but look at that, 20% success, and that's considered doing good. And so I think that the other thing with thought employees is, what are we encouraging them to do with their time? And so a lot of thought employees, they get a little bit frustrated. They're like, why am I being micromanaged? Why are they all of a sudden in my business? Yeah. Why do they care who I'm talking to? We've got this stupid time clock that I have to clock in and out. And those kinds of things start to frustrate thought employees. And a good manager understands that, I really shouldn't try and stifle my thought employees. I should allow them some autonomy.
Right.
And with that autonomy, you got to be quick to reward and quick to get rid of bad thought employees. Like, if they're bad, fire them. You don't want to have, because a lot of thought employees, they'll spin whatever tale they need to try and convince, I'm doing a good job, and well, this is why, and and so you got to look and see, well, what really are you doing? What have you accomplished in the don't tell me what you're going to do next year. Show me what you accomplished this last year.
And I like that word accomplished, because the thought employees are much better working at getting things done than working hours, right? So they're the way that their brain naturally is going to work is, all right, here's the things I need to get done today in this time frame, along with these other things that I need to manage along with this. So they do a really good job of getting things done. But at the same time, I always put out there a little bit that I think it's the Parkinson rule, that the time fills the task. Yeah. Right? Or it's probably the other way. The task fills the amount of time I allot to it.
Yeah, that would be
the other way around. So, so if I'm not allowing them to be creative and explore and do some pilot stuff, then essentially what all of a sudden pretty soon you find is that if they have a project on their table and they have 2 weeks to get it done, and 3 days, you've gone 3 days, how's it going? Great. Can you show me results? Well, no, not yet, because they're looking at it and saying, well, I only need 4 days to do this one, right? So I'm just kind of wasting time right now. Versus if they know that they have opportunities to implement other things and thoughts that they're doing, and pulling from other resources for find efficiencies, they always do that. They just naturally do that. And so that idea that they're getting paid to get things done and not work hours is more important, to allow them just to run at that pace, instead of making sure, hey, you're an 8 to 5. I don't care what you say. You got to be here 8 to 5 because I'm going to watch what you're doing.
Yeah. So I think that's a good summary on thought employees. I want to transition into sales employees, and I'm only going to touch on sales employees kind of quickly. There's a lot of theory on sales employees, commission structures that you can find out there. Personally, I've seen more failed commission structures than successful commission structures, just in my own experience. They're hard to get right. And this is, okay, so you're getting into the theory of Ryan here. There are people who have more expertise on motivating salespeople and commission structures than I do. So I really want to be clear that this is the theory of Ryan. But I think one of the reasons why sales is so difficult is because sometimes sales are producers, sometimes sales are thought employees. And if you don't understand what part of their job is being a producer. So behind every sale, there is the requirement to facilitate the sale. Now, is the salesperson, are they the ones that have to facilitate the sale, or is there a team behind them where they get to be, if they're solely a commission, what do the commission salespeople do? They go out, they churn and burn, they just drive as many sales as they can. They don't care about the consequences. And then who's left picking up the pieces? The accounting team and the logistics team. They have to ship everything expedited because the salesperson overpromised, and they get really frustrated with the salespeople. But then you have the owner who's super excited because they're like, oh my gosh, look, sales are growing. And so that's where I look at it and I say, and we've been talking in terms of like, a thought employee is over in this category, a producer is over in this category. You can have someone who half of their job is thought, half their job is production, and it's the same employee. And that happens a lot with sales, where you have someone who, okay, I want the creative side of you. How long does it take to close a deal? It depends. That's a thought function.
That's right.
Sometimes they close quickly because the buyer is like, I need this yesterday. Let's just make this happen. And sometimes you're still whining and dining this person 9 months later, trying to get them to buy their first order from you. And so there's this combination. And I guess that's the takeaway that I am going to kind of wrap up my thoughts with, is to say, if you're trying to put together a commission structure with your sales team, I think step one is distinguishing how much of their work is thought work and how much of their work is production work. If they're the one that has to put in the sales order, they have to do the paperwork. If they're the ones that maybe it's an account manager that has a specific routine or a route that they have to hit every week, and they just stop in to see, okay, what do you need to order this week? That's more of a producer. Even though they're in a sales role, they're just facilitating a task. And so I would delineate how much is thought and how much is production. And I would only ever commission on the thought, and I would make sure that the commission doesn't pull away from the production side of things. And that's tricky, because if I'm getting a base salary, I get that base salary regardless of what I do. So if my paperwork's done right or wrong, who cares? And if my commission is where I really make my money, I'm going to do crappy paperwork and I'm going to dump it on accounting and just say, they're production employees, so I'll just let them deal with it. And it causes problems. And so anyway, I apologize that I don't have a solution for that, but I do have a first step, and that is delineate between thought and production.
But one of the, and this would be, I guess, one of my closing thoughts, is that I know that as managers, those expectations are not real clear amongst employees and their different roles.
Yeah.
And the more you can separate those out and make sure that everyone knows that, hey, look, we have different roles and responsibilities, which also means that our commitments are different, which also means our work hours could be different. And that's established from the beginning, and that's part of the culture. You tend not to have problems, right? People know that. But then I also like your comment that amongst that you have inside of your organization opportunity to increase or shift or change if one of them looks more appealing, and you're willing to make, whatever I don't want to say sacrifices, but you're putting
trade-offs.
Yeah. To make the shift from one role to another.
Yeah. Well, and I think you bring up a really good point, and that is to just talk about the fact that within within this whole process, there are these nuances, and it's not here's the right answer, here's the wrong answer. But as you were talking about the process, like, the better your process is, the less you have to deal with nuances. And too many entrepreneurs, they got the process all up here in their head, and they think it's crystal clear. But the reality is it's not. Everyone's second guessing. They're like, I don't know what the boss wants. He told me this, and now he's doing this, and I don't know what to. And so dealing with this, if you can have a smooth process, the smoother your process, the better your road, the faster you can drive.
Yeah, I totally agree. Systems and processes are so important.
Yeah. So, okay. I think any other thoughts on that?
No other thoughts.
So, honestly, there was a lot that I didn't even get into because we could have gone on for, and we're not doing an immediate follow-up episode. There's some other topics that we have in mind that are pretty exciting, but I do want to just say, hey, there's a lot to this. We'd love to hear your comments. If you guys have some thoughts on the different types of management styles, obviously you heard our take. We'd love to hear your take. So you can reach out to us, Ryan at learnbiz.co, Ethan at learnbiz.co. And with that, we'll catch you next time.
Thanks.